Book 4, Falcon in the Barn, Chapter 25. Like everyone else, I fell for the stories. A couple of moons later, on the 37th day of the new year, 337, once again, two men sat in the dark office of an unlit building. "I think you will find all of this most intriguing," said Mal, eyeing his new partner and making mental notes of his every reaction. For the past year, Mal had grown bored with the world, and it was time to make it interesting again. Brizak was gone, but Mal's heart had never been stronger, and so it was time to get it pumping again. Too long had the chair across from him remained unoccupied. "I'm already very impressed," said the second, younger man. While he was short and a bit on the stocky side with thinning hair, he had sufficiently beady eyes that no one thought to cross him. He was a perfect badger. On first glance, one might think it a soft, furry little animal, but quickly one realizes it's the most vicious, oversized rodent ever to terrorize the world. Mal regretted that it took him so long to recognize the potential. "I've admired your work for years, Chairman, yet never knew whose work it was. I suspected the directions originated in the hierarchy, but I never dared believe it was so high. You are to be commended, sir." Mal nodded at the acceptable response. "I've worked hard over the years to keep my involvement unknown. Your predecessor said it was interference, but because of his poorly executed interference, he's no longer here to criticize. I certainly can't leave everything to chance. There must be control in every situation." The second man nodded. "Of course, sir." The chairman smiled, satisfied that his new partner was already seeing things his way. "A suitable and contributing colleague is most important to this work. I've been watching you for some time, and I was quite pleased with how your office handled that ridiculous midnight ride a Shin play that ran for far too long." "Why, thank you, sir," Administrator Genev simpered. "Sometimes people simply need to understand the facts more correctly. It's unfortunate that so much of the world labored under the impression that the rescue mission was the idea of General and Colonel Shin. My alterations to the play remedied that, and now the world understands that the Shins were working directly under the administrator's orders. The rescue of Edge was not their idea, it was yours." Mal nodded. "Yes, very well done. Nearly as clever as your recommendations on how to deal with that Moreland incident." Genev offered what he thought was a demure smile. "Again, I thank you, Chairman. Truly, had the garrison suspected what was happening in Moreland, they would have originated the plan that Colonel Shin implemented. He simply anticipated their desires, but the influencing factors of the raid itself, along with its immense success, came directly from the garrison and Idemia. However, for Shin's small part in carrying out his orders well, the fort was renamed for him, and he was released from his probation." Mal chuckled. "Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. We need the world to believe that Shin is acting, and always has been acting, in the administrator's behalf." Genev blinked obsequiously. "To let the citizens believe there is any discordance is to allow them to lend their loyalties to him instead of the administrators." "And a division of loyalty is not what we need," Mal said. Genev emitted a noise that barely fit the definition of chuckle. "You don't need to tell me of that, Chairman. That's my department, after all. I've already added dozens of files to what Gadaman left, and I'm sure you've seen the reports on those I've brought into Idemia for sedition. Granted, it's not as many as Gadaman brought in, but it seems the world has become less feisty over the years." He sounded disappointed by that. "In almost every account, they've accepted your rule and control quite thoroughly." Mal smiled faintly. Genev was bored as well. the perfect companion. Except, Mal said slowly, someone in the world has chosen to suddenly throw the past in our faces again. Genevieve sat up eagerly. Oh, yes, he snarled in glee. If only we knew who. I assume that in time your office will figure that out, and you can deal with their disloyalty, Mal assured him. In the meantime, we need a strategy for dealing with this development. Genevieve nodded thoughtfully. First, we need to ascertain if the map truly is Terrap's lost map. It's not, Mal said. It's a forgery, a copy. Genevieve squinted. Are you sure? Almost completely. I had some historians look at it, and they say the ink is too fresh and dark, and the parchment doesn't appear to be old enough. Genevieve shrugged. Well, then, that's that. Nothing more needs to be done. Mal held up his finger. Oh, but there does. Think about this. Whoever makes one copy can make several copies. Yes, slowly said the administrator of loyalty, as if following the logic, but the blank look in his eyes indicated he was lost. Mal took a patient breath. This copy was sent to me. More copies may be sent elsewhere, to others who may be curious or quietly rebellious. The entire world has been gripped with landlust, Administrator. We've had reports for several moons now about citizens stealing the land of the dead, and in many cases, the land of the still living. It's whetted their appetite for even more. This map in the hands of the wrong people? We could have a major loss of containment. If people go searching for Terrap's western lands on their own, there go all of our test subjects. Genevieve nodded, a bit slower than Brizek would have had. Naturally, sir, this means, of course, that we need to be in control of what happens next with the map. How many know of its existence? Besides you and me, a few other administrators at best. But as I said, I don't know if other copies have already been sent out. We need to make the first move, and quickly. Yes, we do, Genevieve said, his eyes shifting in thought. Brizek never appeared so overtly worried, Mal thought to himself. But it is better to have such a transparent companion. How many people in the world even remember Terrap? Genevieve wondered. The school stopped teaching him and his findings over 15 years ago. That's nearly a generation. Mal nodded. And how many of their parents and grandparents remember him? Or his travels with King Quirrell the First soldiers past the western deserts? Or his fantastical stories about the origins of the world? I suspect their memories are fuzzy and incomplete. We can manipulate that. Genevieve raised an eyebrow. I saw the administrator of culture leaving your office earlier this evening. Was he there because... Because the world is going to want to remember who Terrap was once this business of his discovered map gets out, Mal said. The administrator and his staff will provide that memory, as well as a more correct evaluation of Terrap, his mental stability, and his findings. Crafted just right, Genevieve began to smile. Terrap can be completely discredited. But that won't work with the entire population, Mal sighed. There are too many in my generation who still think fondly of him. We can easily sway the younger who have no lingering memories and never played Find Missing Terrap in their schoolyards, but the older generation, with its propensity to remember everything far better than it ever was, will be a harder sell. I also saw the administrator of science leaving your office, Genevieve hinted. Yes, Mal sighed more dismally. We have to send out an expedition. We're going to prove, once and for all, the truth about Terrap's western lands beyond the desert. Genevieve's jaw dropped. You can't be serious. Who would volunteer for such a dangerous mission and subject themselves to the same torments that affected Terep so that he went insane? Genev stopped when he saw the slight smile on Mal's face. I fell for it, Genev whispered. Like everyone else, I fell for the stories. Mal's smile began to widen. It won't be that difficult, you see. Even you still believe what you were told. Genev, the chairman sat back in his chair, did you know that the first 3 quarrels kept servants? Genev shrugged. Every king needs servants. No, not like that. I mean, kept servants. For years. They never left the compound. Genev's raised eyebrows told Mal that this was news to him. When I first took over this mansion 20 years ago, I made a thorough inspection of it. I knew the first quarrels were ruthless but brilliant in their own ways. They also would have been arrogant enough to keep records of their triumphs. And they did. Mal smiled smugly. I found crates of documents hidden behind a false wall, dating back to Quarrel the First. I'd never before realized he was such a skilled researcher in his own right. He began his experiment on containment at the beginning of the Great War in 195. He started with 8 servants and kept them confined to his compound. Ever wonder why the grounds are surrounded by a stone wall twice as tall as a man? Not to keep the enemies out? No, to keep his servants in. Oh, he told them he had it constructed for safety, but his personal writings said it was to test a theory. He told his servants that they were like family to him, and he'd hate for them to be witnesses to the devastation that was occurring in Idumea with raids from outerlying villages. They believed him. Every horror imaginable, he imagined, and shared with them. Soon they were too terrified to even consider approaching the walls, sure that a stray arrow would come over the top and hit them. They found arrows many mornings in the compound, evidence of battles that raged around the mansion. Or so they surmised. Genev was breathless. Mal smiled at his stunned response. After 5 years, Quarrel's servants had no desire to leave the mansion grounds. Only their small corner of the world was safe, obviously. But whenever Quarrel thought his servants' belief was waning, he dropped more evidence over the stone walls, usually in the form of dead bodies desecrated in torturous ways. Even a few children's corpses were tossed over, to demonstrate that no one was immune from the fighting surrounding Idumea. He traumatized them into believing nowhere was safe. But, Genev finally spoke, fighting never reached the heart of Idumea. The edges, yes, but the army always kept it out of the center of the city. Now, how would have Quarrel's servants ever known about that? Genev blinked. They wouldn't. If their only source of information was Quarrel the First, then... Precisely. He even had some of his soldiers run around the compound a couple of times a year, screeching and shouting. He achieved complete control over the knowledge and thoughts of his servants. So wildly successful was he that he took the next step. He began to use the same methods over the world. First, he controlled what they knew and eliminated that which was counter to his agenda. That was when he established neighborhood schools, an idea we've expanded. Quarrel also gathered all of the family lines, and with them much of the history concerning the first families. Telling everyone that he was to compile it in one shared book, to be distributed freely throughout the world, was what convinced everyone to give up their most prized documents. He also found and collected records written by the first families, the guides, even the one who claimed he was the creator. And Quarrel discovered documents containing descriptions of terrain and geography of this entire sphere, details about the stars, movements of the sea, descriptions of phenomena such as storm patterns, and even what happens when a volcano erupts. It became clear to Quirrell that much of this information had been passed down orally from parent to child, since parchment was so expensive and rarely used for any writings except the most important details, as those documents represented. Without that knowledge being recorded, it would eventually be forgotten. But Quirrell had worried that if somehow all of those bits and pieces were ever compiled together, it would present a vast wealth of knowledge. And if the populace had all that knowledge, nothing could restrain them from leaving Idumea and its surroundings. They would know enough to break free. Genev slowly shook his head in amazement. So the fire that consumed all those writings in the stone vault, Quirrell did that intentionally, didn't he? Oh, yes, Mal nodded in appreciation. Of course, he played it up as if it were a great tragedy, but it was all part of his plan. He had many plans for the world and for his own wealth. But if a people aren't contained, their skills, knowledge, and labor can't be capitalized upon by the most powerful in the world. So, Quirrell traumatized the world, similarly as he had done to his servants. He embarked on controlling their knowledge and terrifying them from ever leaving. He sent out Terup to gather information from the western lands, fully intending to discredit him when he returned. Terup lent him a hand in that. So inspired and enthused by what he discovered, he came back quite mad. Terup found all kinds of ruins, etchings in stone and other forms of writings, carved illustrations of animals no one had ever seen. It was quite simple to demonstrate the western lands were poisoned and empty for a reason. Look how maddened Terup was once he returned. Genius, Genev breathed. Quirrell was, Mal sighed, almost in envy. But someone saw through his tactic, the last guide, Pax. He confronted Quirrell, told him it was all lies, and that he would expose his deceit to the world. That's when Quirrell sent him out to discover new lands for himself. He gave Pax supplies and even his own personal guards, with explicit directions for those guards to kill the meddling old man who claimed he was inspired by the Creator. A few weeks later, Quirrell's guards returned to him with blood on their hands, and a promise that Guide Pax was no longer a threat. Genev squinted. Yes, I've heard that before, but Quirrell had those guards executed. Mal chuckled in appreciation. Yes, that's what he told the world. He feigned fury that his guards killed the revered guide, the man that was to find them new homes for those still troubling the world with violence. But the only one who troubled Quirrell at that time was old Pax. Quirrell paid off those guards, quite handsomely, for a job well done, and they each left Idumea with new names and identities. But thousands still tried to leave Idumea and the world, Genev said, struggling to reconcile what he thought he knew with what he knew now. Education can so easily unseat one's confidence about the truth of the world, Mal noted privately. Obviously, he'd been doing it right all these years. Yes, some people tried to run away, Mal nodded. They were either loyal to Pax or were still trying to disrupt the harmony Quirrell was creating. He let them go for a time, watching where they ran as they left for the forests. Quirrell turned that to his favor. In essence, he created the first girders. As people fled, he quietly sent his soldiers to slaughter them. But publicly, Quirrell let the world believe that most of them escaped, and that they continued to torment the world out of vengeance. So, were there any that actually made it to the forests? Mal shrugged. Quirrell thought so, but how could they survive in such a hostile environment? He doubted any made it for long. In my 20 years of doing this, none of my men have reported seeing anyone else. And just how reliable are your men, sir? Genevieve ventured. Reliable enough, Mal insisted. Genevieve nodded once back. Remarkable. I never realized how shrewd Quirrell the First was. Nor did I, until I found the crate, Mal agreed. Then I was wise enough to burn all of his writing so no one else would ever know. Rather made me sad, he said wistfully. Makes me wonder if my successor will do the same to all of my research, that no one would ever know the extent of my intellect. I suppose I should just never die then. Genevieve started to smile until he realized Mal was serious. Genevieve, the chairman said with a faraway look in his eyes, I think I know who sent that map. Who, sir? Someone who had access to it before the fire. Quirrell stored many of his records here in the mansion, then moved them to the old garrison. Twice the documents and maps had to be moved. And who do you think may have helped in that? Genevieve shrugged. The servants. Oh, sir, where are they now? Mal sighed. I'd never been able to find out. They were in this mansion for nearly 50 years. 3 generations, 33 people in all by the time of Quirrell the Fourth. The stupid, interjected Genevieve. Indeed. The fourth had been convinced by the new High General, Per Shin, that the servants had been contacted by the Garters and were plotting against his family. So Quirrell released them, and Shin relocated them somewhere in the east, maybe coast or winds. That Shin did not keep very good records, Mal added in irritation. And my examination of all the garrison files didn't reveal much, except that he arranged for some people to teach them the ways of the world. The pathetic servants didn't even know how to read. If they had any brains at all, they changed their names and left for other villages. They'd be untrackable by now. All of them are likely dead, but if one of them saw Terrap's map so many years ago and stole it... Maybe it was kept in their family all this time, Genevieve suggested, handed down from parent to child, waiting for the opportune moment to reveal itself. Mal nodded. Such as a time like this, when the world becomes hungry for land and wants to escape the safe compound in which they've thrived for so many years. What really would be the problem with letting perhaps 10% of the population leave? Genevieve wondered. It would give everyone the room they're wanting. Fighting would go down. Mal stared at him. I've heard you've made great renovations to your new mansion. Genevieve frowned at the abrupt change of topic, but he went along with it. Gadaman used only a small section of the servants' quarters. He didn't even open the doors to the north wing for years. I've had to hire a dozen more laborers to restore and maintain it. And how is all of that work being paid for? Mal said. Genevieve faltered for a moment. I thought it was covered in the administrator needs clause of my contract. It is. Now, my dear administrator, where do the funds come from? Our needs are very great because we in the government give so much to the world that the world needs to give back to us even more. Taxation? Genevieve ventured. Yes. And if our revenue goes down by 10% because that many citizens leave, there also go all of your renovations, along with your pay increase and your 8 weeks of paid leave. We have to recontain the world, Genevieve burst out. We can't afford to lose anyone. Mal noticed it frequently took administrators some time to realize that taxes, their income, actually came from real, everyday people. As senseless and bothersome as they usually were, the government really did need its citizenry. Yes, Mal intoned. I believe I made the point for containment some time ago. That's why we're not going to ignore this map, Administrator. That's why we're sending out our own expedition. We'll only have to remind the world of the dangers of Terrap's land, and even those in my generation will shrink back in fear. So, when the expedition returns with new findings, they'll be influenced by the administrators over culture and science, who, while not knowing nearly as much as you and me, do understand the need for containment. And those findings will be of such a nature that we should be able to keep the world confined here for another 137 years. Mal clasped his hands on his lap. Genevieve shook his head in admiration. Absolutely stunning. Here I was thinking it would be disastrous, but no. His eyes lit up with a new idea. Chairman, so much could come from something like this. Killed 2 falcons with 1 cat. Mal frowned. Just what are you getting at, Genevieve? You brought me here to deal with another problem, did you not? I've spent several weeks reading all about a certain colonel in the northernmost edge of the world. Mal couldn't help but lick his lips. How will Perrin play into this? Genevieve chuckled in his indefinable way. Years ago, he annoyed you, remember? Back in command school, he even challenged you in front of the entire class, insisting that your definition of a person as an animal was wrong. He did, Mal said steadily, waiting for the rest. I read your notes from that time. Shin declared that the Creator made men and women higher than animals, and because of that, they are capable of looking evil in the eye and facing it. Mal made a fist. And? Sir, hasn't he done precisely that? What do you mean? All I mean is Shin recovered. Where so many other men perished, according to Dr. Brizak's findings, Shin overcame his trauma. And then he went on to organize the northern armies and completely wipe out the Garters. Not completely, Mal whispered. I'm sure there's still a few communicators. Who have sent how many communications in the past year? None, Mal confessed. But we still have one very persistent general. Genevieve nodded, partially in sympathy. We can begin to build the Garters back up again, sir. From your notes, it seems to take about 1.5 years to recruit and train as many as we would need. Yes, Mal groaned. And we will, as soon as this issue with Terrap's map is resolved, he reminded. And Shin? Sir, it's been my experience that people gain a great deal of comfort from that which they believe in. They even imagine they receive some kind of power from it. I interrogated a woman not long ago who clutched a zucchini she believed talking to her. Obviously, she was delusional. I agree, Genevieve said. All of us, to some extent, are delusional in what we believe. You and I, only very slightly. My zucchini woman, quite heavily. And those who believe in the Creator, the most delusional of them all, Mal said, his tone developing a lighter quality. Which would make Shin... We can't prove he's insane, Genevieve said, reining in the chairman's eagerness. But what would compromise him is if he recognized the delusional quality all by himself. If he's presented with evidence that runs contrary to everything he's ever believed... Mal looked up at the ceiling. Yes! He'd destroy himself! Genevieve smiled. And many others. More than once his soldiers have reported hearing him mention the Creator. I received a report that he even told them at Moreland that the Creator was pleased with their efforts there. Mal closed his eyes and chuckled. Oh, I was correct in choosing you. That's precisely what I've needed. New ideas to torment Perrin Shin. We don't even need Garters. Oh, sir, but we do, Genevieve said earnestly. We must begin recruiting as soon as possible. Within 1.5 years, we will need them." Mal narrowed his eyes. "And why is that?" "What's the point of an army if there's no one to fight? Wasn't that one of your early personal essays?" "Just how much reading of my works have you done, Administrator?" Genevieve shrugged. "All of it?" Mal raised his eyebrows. "I don't know whether to be flattered or suspicious." "I believe it's good to be a little of both," Genevieve suggested. "So, what will we do with Garters if Perrinshin is already a broken man?" "We will break him and another even more. We can't assume Shin will be completely devastated to realize the creator was nothing more than someone's imagination. We need to have another plan to continue his destruction." Mal clasped his hands together again. "So tell me, how will you devastate him and another?" His new colleague smiled primly. "Has there ever been a high general who made it to retirement age?" "No. And I have a feeling you're about to suggest the current one won't make it either." The administrator of loyalty held out his hands. "It's just that you are getting on in years, and I'd hate for you to have to wait an unnaturally long time to continue your observations, especially when the High General has such an eager and well-trained advisor. Kush is already failing. His ultimate demise could be subtle and appear natural by Thorne's hands." Mal's eyebrows rose. My, that is progressive. Then he'll have the High General position for his efforts, I assume. Genevieve smiled and folded his arms. "Kayan will think all of his efforts are for one purpose, but that's when the long-lost son will make his return." "As much as I would love to see Thorne not receive the position, I'm not sure that you understand," said the chairman carefully, "how involved Kayan is. There have been promises made." "Oh, I do understand. I've done all the reading, remember?" said Genevieve. "One of your earliest studies was Discomfort Breeds Growth. I'd like to witness that. So we'll create discomfort. Kayan Thorne seems far too eager to call the shots, and far less willing to follow the orders. This isn't his experiment now, is it? We'll help him remember that fact. Despite all of his efforts and assistance, he's merely a player. Isn't that so?" Mal chuckled. "I'd love to see General Thorne do some growing as well. But consider this. There's the possibility Shin may turn down the appointment to High General. He's never been fond of Idamia." "Oh, he'll come all right," said Genevieve confidently, "because I suspect he'd follow his wife to the ends of the world, or in this case, to the very center of it." "His wife?" said Mal, surprised. "How will she play into this?" "Gadaman left an enormous amount of files brimming with allegations and suspicions. The thickest file of all belongs to a Mrs. Mari Pato Shin. All that's needed are a few more pages, and Administrator Genevieve," he said smugly, "can require her to come to Idamia to make a full accounting of her years of sedition." The chairman let out a low whistle. "I've seen that file. She's never done anything more than say a few things and write a few letters, unfortunately. The rest was Gadaman's paranoid suppositions. Not enough to twist into full sedition. And we don't have laws against someone's words and ideas." "Not yet," Genevieve said with a hint of planning. Mal rubbed his chin. "Would take quite a bit of doing. There are a few administrators who would be difficult to convince to pass such a law, but maybe," he said, leaning forward, "maybe we just need the threat, not the actual laws. You mentioned thickening her file. How will you do that?" "I have an idea or two of how to gather evidence of her threat to the world. It will likely take a few seasons, but nothing too long, Genevieve assured him. Of course, we'll agree to drop the sedition charges as long as she promises to behave herself in the future and support her husband as the new High General. Then we'll have them both under our influence here in Idemia. They'll be too intimidated to make a wrong move against the administrators, and that's when we can try some truly probing experiments. Stabbing a caged animal is quite entertaining. Then what of General Thorne? Said Mal with a knowing smile. Genevieve chuckled, or Mal assumed the sound was meant to be. Wouldn't that be the problem of the new High General's shin? Perhaps that should be the first question we test. What will Kay and Thorne do once he's cast aside? What happens when two male bears fight for the same territory? Mal clapped his hands. Yes, I can hardly wait. Get me some parchment. I need to be writing all of this down. And that's the end of that chapter. Thank you.